Hi everyone, yesterday was released the update 41 patch notes and the public test server was open, coming with a bunch of new sets, class balance, and core combat changes. I will only cover the one I just relevant, so let's dive in. It's important to cover first the class balance, as some changes you will see afterward will be easier to analyze. DK just got a very nice buff to their sustain, recovering now both resources every time you proc a status, which will help a lot both DK specs to sustain and should be immediately noticeable on dummy and in content. They also slightly reverted the nerf to combustion, which is always nice to take. Warden, the ice passive got halved, which is compensated by a chilled change we will see later. The part that really impacts Warden is a nerf to charge, who got reduced a lot, resulting on proccing status way less than before and with DPS loss, even with their base damage being increased. Warden should still gain a bit of damage on dummy due to the change on bleed status that we will see later on, but out of dummy this is pretty bad for Warden DPS. You are most likely to have even less damage now, and there was no sustain buffs either, letting Warden in the unplayable tier still, like what we saw this patch with his 180 players. Arcanist, Beam got nerfed by 7%. It kinda doesn't change anything, it will be noticeable on dummy, but not in content. Here is an exact dummy comparison with the general changes to status and beam. Azerblade will do more damage due to the disease buff, so in AoE fights, Arcanist will still do the same, but instead of doing 30k more single target in other classes, they will only do 25k more, which doesn't change much. You have to understand that Arcanist doesn't really do more single targets in longer fights, that's what a DK could do for example. It's the overall package, and especially his insane AoE burst and damage in trash that really makes him superior, so it will stay on top by far. The status passive got nerfed. It doesn't change anything either. Arc is still exactly at the range of guaranteed status proc with a relevant effect, so you will not notice any difference. The range of rune got slightly increased. It shouldn't change much, but the synergy buff might be noticeable in AoE fights like Rift Guardian. The shield beam value got reduced. This will make Arc less safe for Trifectas, but most people nowadays understood that doing more damage meant safer fights and are not using the short beam anyway, so it will not change that much outside of dungeons. Nightblade, concealed weapon no longer gives Major Berserk and no longer procs on your movement speed buff from pass. Debilitate no longer have guarantee of a charge proc, but 15% instead, honoring that charge is nerfed and it ticks every 2 seconds. This is a negative change even with a status buff. They removed the sustain from in-cap. The buff on in-cap only works on the 120 ult, so you will never use it pretty much. And the buff on Soul Harvest is useless, as there is no better ult to front bar anyway. So not much to say, dead class in red, even deader now. At least Nightblade got a big improvement with Siphoning Strikes, who now heal you passively without having to do anything. Especially the Siphoning attack morph. The sustain and healing it gives is very appreciable in formal content, where Nightblade is correct. Necromancer. Controversial rework, Magical Blast Bones is now a self buff who increases your damage over time and graveyard damage by 20%. It might have potential at first, but it is a terrible change. It nukes your sustain from having no max semi-spammable anymore, it nukes your AoE damage. Skills like Boneyard and Siphon, who should get a 40% damage increase, are only getting 20% and are therefore still terrible. And you can't empower your Boneyard or keep your Siphon up correctly half of the time due to the lack of corpses. This is terrible. Necromancer is in an even worse and less fun to play class than before, while it already was an horrible class. None of the issues are fixed. Colo is still an horrible ultimate, Archer is still unusable in red, you still do no damage, and now you have sustain issues, terrible AoE, and a bad Siphon uptime if you thought about trying to do EC in red. Also, they changed the Necro passive back to what it was. Sadly, it doesn't change anything to the other things that have been done. Sorc. Lightning Splash got a 2 meter radius increase, which is always nice to take. It's actually really big now. Sorcerer Dunk got a nice healing on the shield, as Arcanist does, and rely less on their healing pet now. The max HP passive got slightly changed, and you can interpret it now as DPS in trash. You have 10% more max dam, which is always good. It's sadly not enough to enable a not bad build, but it's still nice. The AoE Yacho will do more DPS thanks to the change on Concussed. So for core combat changes, they nerf charge threats. It will not affect dummy on most specs due to the status buff, but you will definitely use press as often in red now. Status got buffed. Burning is nerfed a bit, but you will most likely not notice it. Poisoned is slightly reworked, you will not notice it either, outside of boss bugs who are really happy about it. Concussed gets a little buff, which will be noticeable on Sorc AoE Atronach. Bleed got a huge buff, it now stacks, and as it mostly comes these days from Trap, it's gonna be full stacked all the time pretty much, especially on Warden with Beer, which will result on a nice damage buff. It will also put Blustered in a very good spot now, it's most likely better than Rapid Strike now, in cases where you have limited bleed procs. Overcharge, Sundered, Chilled, and Disease got buffed. It's anecdotic, except for Azure Blight, we will make a good use of Disease, now being AoE. The Undaunted Taunt skill, in Harvest, no longer grants damage buff, however, the Magic Amorph now grants a damage energy, which will add some nice damage to DPS in trash. It is also flame damage now, so it procs on gratis. New sets. Some new sets have potential. The new medium set has good line, good effect, good proc condition, but sadly, the tooltip is awful. If they buff it in the future, it will become very good. This new medium set is a nice support set for healers, for double support trials where you have space. Consider it as SPC pretty much. However, on PTS right now, it doesn't proc on overheal, making it unplayable. Hopefully it will be fixed soon enough. They finally hybridized the last line from Sorcerer, making it a really good option from now on classes who benefit a lot from weapon damage and currently do not have a better option than Pillar of Nirn. I mostly think about Boss Templar. They fixed the burning bug from Runecarver, which should increase a lot its effect on decay on some fights such as Wax also, and they are increasing the number of keys you are getting from hard mode DLC pledges, which is really great. That's about it for changes. Overall, I feel like not much change in terms of meta. Arcanist and DK stays S tier and the rest stays in the mud. The bow builds should get a pretty positive gain out of this patch thanks to the status change and being unaffected by the charge nerf. Hopefully, they will adjust some of the new changes of Nightblade and Necromancer and will eventually buff Warden. If this video was helpful, please consider sharing it, like and subscribe. Thanks again to everyone supporting the channel. Have a nice day.